Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Arbeiter again, Missouri Department of Economic Development, your Director of Broadband Development. And it is an exciting day for broadband in Missouri. Right now, it looks like we have 30 attendees participating in this afternoon's webinar. If you've been receiving communications or tweets or Facebook, you would know that Governor Parson just an hour and a half ago announced nearly $50 million in support for broadband expansion and connectivity in Missouri. So this is an exciting day. Many of you were hopping on probably to talk about the bill signing event that happened this morning, and that is an exciting time as well for broadband. But more importantly, we're going to talk about the broadband provider expansion program. So we are going to kind of hop into it because I know we are at the tail end of a holiday week. I would imagine most of your offices are closed tomorrow, and if they're open, have a great day researching all these materials. But it is my pleasure today to talk to you about the Show Me Strong Recovery Plan with Governor Parson's commitment to workforce development and infrastructure, both of those two intertwined with broadband investment. So let's kick things off. So there's my title page. Well, this afternoon we talked about the rapid broadband deployment strategy announced by Governor Parson and described in detail by Director Dixon, but we wanted to give some highlights to you on the 6 strategies that are being undertaken for this broadband development strategy. So I'm going to quickly kind of go over these. These slides are going to be made available on the website by close of business today or a little after. So in case you need to digest this after the webinar, you totally can. So these are the 6 initiatives. Provider expansion. This is what this webinar is about, is the provider expansion piece. A commitment of $20 million to assist existing broadband providers in their connections support during the crisis this past spring, and as they continue to look in the summer and in the fall to enhance more expansions in there. So we're going to get into that a little bit more for the remainder of the webinar. The next 2 pieces, support for K-12 and higher ed. These are help with short-term connectivity strategies to help our students in K-12 or in higher education get some connectivity. My colleagues from DESE and the Department of Higher Ed and Workforce Development, acronym DUDE, will be working. Those 2 phases are under development still, and they will be discussed later next week by both Commissioners Van Dieven from DESE and Commissioner Mulligan from Higher Ed. So stay tuned on that. But a $20 million support for those 2 programs to help in some short-term connectivity needs for students. Next item is healthcare centers or healthcare and telehealth strategy. This is a allocation of about $5.25 million from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and I should make note, all of these resources are being made available through the Coronavirus Relief Fund under the CARES Act. But this telehealth piece is in partnership. We as DED will be the fiscal agent for this, but the program administrator will be the entity called the Missouri Telehealth Network. They actually reside in the School of Medicine at the University of Missouri, and they are an established network that already has an existing relationships with all the federally qualified healthcare clinics and the community mental health clinics in the state. So all told, about 55 or 56 centers altogether, essentially helping with some short-term connectivity, potentially in hotspots for those clients that essentially those centers would request those hotspots from the Missouri Telehealth Network and be accessible to the clients there. Library systems, a critical community anchor institution in all of our sectors of the state, urban, suburban, and rural. Sometimes connectivity can only happen at the library. They can only get on with technology there. So this particular strategy will help the library system. This will be, fiscal agent will be DED, but the program administrator will be the Office of the State Librarian at the Secretary of State's office. They will, that program is live today with Missouri libraries applying for those grant funds to do Wi-Fi enabled devices, some bandwidth expansion for those libraries that need to increase connectivity, and then also availability to do some checkout on hotspots. And so that is live today. That deadline is July 31st, but the Secretary of State and the Office of the State Librarian is making those communications to the library network as we speak. And then the last piece, the 5 items listed above really are focused on some short-term rapid strategies to help with connectivity now and into the fall if the pandemic arises again. But this broadband technical assistance piece will help with some feasibility studies, broadband modeling for up to 24 counties, essentially 8 regional clusters will be selected by a pilot program. And these clusters will be identified through a pretty in-depth analysis about the COVID-19 impacts on counties, as well as pairing it against the access to broadband, whether they be unserved or underserved. But that research is yet to be done. But the application to the Economic Development Administration on their COVID relief funds has been made by the Missouri Association of Councils of Government, with DED serving as co-applicant to secure just over $613,000 from the EDA. That is an application. We have not received that grant, and so we're eager to find out the results of it, but we will await that. So that is a strategy that could get deployed in the near future, but not right now. There's not a funding source. So let's go to the next page. Highlights of the Broadband Investment Program. It's $20 million, as I said earlier. It is going to be providing assistance to existing broadband providers to assist them with connections made during the pandemic, starting on March 1st and concluding on October 30. And so with that, these will be households subscribed in unserved and underserved areas, assisting a reimbursement for those actual expenditures for those connections. And so providers will, via application, denote how many of those connections were made from March 1 to today, and then a projection of potential connections from today to October 30. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how do we do that. Grant cycle opens today. The websites were listed in the press release. They will also be listed on these slides, and these slides will be made available to you. Applications will be due on noon on Wednesday, July 22nd via online submission. And for my broadband grant applicants who were in the inaugural round the first time, that was one of the big things that was asked for. If we had future rounds, please, oh please, see if we can do this via online submission. And so we are doing so. For many of the providers on this call, this is nothing new to you, but we need to throw it in anyway. State definition of minimum high-speed internet is 25.3. It is also the same definition by the FCC. You guys know this already. I don't have to share this, but what is the definition of unserved, underserved, and served? It's right there on your screen. Eligible applicants, very similar to our existing program. So here are the eligible applicants. Those are those existing broadband providers that are out there that are making connections right now and could rapidly make connections from now until October 30. So here's a list of eligible applicants. Eligible areas, focusing on unserved and underserved connections. So the proposed service areas from this day going to October 30th, the project areas need to be contiguous and all-encompassing, and so we outlined that in a little bit more detail in the program documents. We will be using the most recent data set from the SEC, the June 2019 data set. And so we just wanted to make that known that those areas that are deemed served, this is the current map of the broadband coverage in Missouri. Ineligible areas, for those that are in served census blocks, they would be ineligible. This is not the current broadband program established under state statute, and so there's not a corresponding challenge process with this reimbursement program. And because of that, the connections made in unserved and underserved are the ones that are eligible. And then for providers who are receiving other public assistance, whether that be FCC, USDA, Delta Regional Authority, and also the Missouri Broadband Grant Program, or receiving any other federal, state, or local funding are not eligible to seek reimbursement inside that project area or for those connections that are already receiving some kind of public assistance from another entity. All right, allowable expenditures in calculating your total project cost. These will be very similar and familiar to those who were applicants in the Broadband Grant Program in the spring, or I'm sorry, in late winter. So again, it's the construction of retail broadband development. So it's construction of those facilities, any final engineering or creation of the construction plans, permitting, and the installation. Ineligible, these will also look familiar to you. These are the ineligible things that are inside the existing Broadband Grant Program. Preliminary engineering, general broadband planning that's not related to the project area, operational expenses, middle mile, and then also any expenses for a new connection that does not have a corresponding or unaccompanied subscription. All right, so let's talk about how do you have a qualified household. And so these, there are three distinct areas that would qualify the household as potential for reimbursement. Providers will be required to collect and retain information on each household, and it needs to document and certify that the resident is of a vulnerable population, a resident on telework status, a student, and you see the ranges of education there all the way from pre-K all the way up to higher education. We do have a template for the household attestation form. It's included in the program materials. That is a form that needs to be utilized when you're validating and getting that subscription for that household. And that's for both the connections made starting March 1 to today, and then the connections that are projected to be made from today to October 30. And then again, I've already mentioned reimbursed for each subscribed household. So let me actually go back one slide. I just want to kind of maybe give a little bit more definition to this because I know there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding it. When we were doing our deep dive on the analysis on the CARES Act and what are eligible things for us to look at, the guidance received from the U.S. Treasury related to broadband deployment had to affix itself to three primary areas, which is vulnerable populations, telehealth, telework status is referenced in the guidance and FAQs, and then as well the distance learning piece for students. And again, we define students very broad from that pre-K all the way up to higher ed. For those participants who are on the call and had an elementary student and trying to keep them connected or in distance learning, I feel your pain. I have teenagers at home, and so I felt bad for all the folks who had littles. But we wanted to provide a little bit more definition on the why. These are the clear things in the U.S. Treasury guidance that are allowable under the CARES Act, and through our deep research and analysis and discussions with legal counsel, these are the things we must do in order to deem these expenses, quote unquote, necessary in the CARES Act. If we cannot do the subscriptions and the attestation forms, they will no longer be necessary. And so that's why you see this layer of reporting and filing necessary for us to validate the expenses for when and such time that audit comes from the U.S. Treasury on how did we spend our CARES Act allocation, and please defend and justify why you did so. So that is why this slide is in there and going into a little bit more detail. So let's get into the definition of a vulnerable population. These are populations that are defined in legislation as it relates to the expansion of mail-in voting for vulnerable populations. The state legislature took up these definitions and signed by the governor. And so with that, we use that as our baseline to describe a vulnerable population member. So if they're going to check that box, your subscriber, check that box on the form, they need to attest to the fact that they have they are 65 years or older, or they have one of these following conditions. And it is critical that they are attest to that and sign off on that, as well as a witness from the provider company. The definition of telework, again, this has been scrubbed and vetted with legal, but it is those citizens who are required to telework at the direction of their company because of COVID-related action. And they must be able to complete their job-related functions on a telework status. And so again, if a household is going to sign the form, they're attesting to the fact that they were given direction from their employer at their place of employment that they need to be on telework status. Definition of a student, we've described this already a couple times, but we need to throw that in there, pre-K to higher ed. Reimbursement and accountability. A few things that there's a couple slides on this, and this is important, and I apologize, but it's going to be a little bit of a deep dive on this one. Our broadband grant program, need to submit a certificate of tax clearance from the Missouri Department of Revenue. That form is included now in the program materials, so if you want to complete that form and get it in at ASAP, even if you're not going to be, if you research all these materials and not going to be an applicant, it wouldn't hurt for you to have a tax clearance on file. But if you are serious about becoming an applicant for consideration, go ahead and get that form signed up now. That form would allow for me, you will see my contact information on the first page of that form. It will allow for me to watch the tax clearances as they're moving through the Department of Revenue, and I can see quickly when clearance is given, and then they will submit the certificate once they're able to process it. And for my applicants in the Broadband Grant Program, earlier in the year, you already know what I'm talking about because I can see that activity a little bit faster than the actual production of a letter that's sent to the provider. We need you to register as a vendor with the state of Missouri. If you're awarded, this really helps expedite things in the payments and disbursements of the funds, and that we're not waiting for the materials to get into the Office of Administration's vendor system. So if you could do that, that is outlined in the materials. If you can just go ahead and have your operations person or your accountants or your finance people get that going, that will help expedite things greatly. If you are awarded, you will execute a program agreement with DED outlining the program details, requirements, and all the state, federal terms and conditions related to the CARES Act, as well as terms and conditions that exist under the state's auspices as well. And we will get those to everyone. You know, essentially we try to do it pre-program agreement so we can give your companies and your councils enough time to review those terms and conditions. Grant funding disbursements will happen on a monthly basis. And if things are going at a pretty good clip, we might be able to do that faster, but on a monthly basis. The customer applications and subscription records need to be kept with the provider for at least 5 years from the date of final reimbursement. And upon request and upon audit by either DED, the state auditor's office, or the U.S. Treasury or other authorized state or federal agencies, that those records would be accessible for audit and review. All right, second slide on reimbursement and accountability. Within 45 days of post-construction, the provider must submit a final report with the project details, the documentation of the new customers, and some speed testing. And so this is going to be required whenever I'm notified that the construction project is finalized. Your clock starts on the report to get to DED. And so DED, this was mentioned in the slide previously, but legal counsel felt it necessary to put it in there again, reserves the right to inspect and audit the project for up to 1 year post-construction. If the project cost ends up exceeding your projected budget for the grant, providers will be responsible for that difference and cannot ask for an increase in reimbursement rates in the application itself. Applicants who commit fraud or misrepresentation or who do not adequately document or retain sufficient documentation shall be subject to state and federal civil criminal recourse to the extent permitted by law. That is my legal disclaimer. I do not do any commercials. I will be done with my legal jargon now. Reimbursement rate per qualified connection. And so these are on a graduated scale because of this fact. We know that providers that are deploying at 25.3 or slightly higher is at a more affordable rate than carriers or providers who are doing substantially higher speeds because of the actual the costs associated with the physical deployment of the infrastructure. And so you see two reimbursement rates, and these are up to a certain this dollar amount. So if it's just above 25.3 and lower than 100 megabit from a range standpoint, you can receive reimbursement for up to $450 for every qualified household. And again, I'm not going to go backwards on the slide, but we've already talked about the qualified household. Now, with that being said, if your actual costs are lower than $450 per connection, that lower rate will be the amount you're reimbursed for. So the $450 per person is not guaranteed. And if you're deploying at 100 megabits or above, you see the range there, that'll be a reimbursement of up to $3,450. And so same as the column or the range described earlier, if your actual expenditures are below that, your reimbursement rate will be that. But it could go up to $3,450. And so you're probably asking yourself the question, why the differential costs and where did these numbers come from? The why on the differential costs is really back to what I was saying earlier. We know higher speed broadband, superior level of that top grade, that 1 gigabit level, is fairly more expensive to deploy. And so we're also not only wanting to achieve the state minimum of 25.3, but the idea and thought to give a little bit more investment to higher rates of speed that are actually deployed. Where did these numbers come from? They actually came from the Missouri Broadband Grant Program and the applicants and averages that were weighted out and then slightly reduced. One of the things that we were encouraged by leadership, whether that be in those our discussions and discussions with the governor's office, is not only to be able to give a significant reimbursement, but also the desire to see participation by the provider on these qualified households. This is the third caveat related to this. Total project commitment via reimbursements to qualified households will not exceed 50% of the total project area. And so on your project budget, if you say you're going to be a $1 million project, this is just for example, if you're going to be a $1 million project and your reimbursements is for total of the qualified household $650,000, your max out contribution from this fund for the Broadband Investment Program would be $500,000. That's 50% of the total cost. It will not exceed that. And so that's a feature that was put in order for us to maximize the number of potential opportunities to have broadband providers submit applications and be considered. Selection criteria. So this is the four categories for the criteria. So broadband connections made during the state of emergency. So again, starting 3/1 to October 30th. So the number of connections that you made from March 1 to July 2nd will be a set of numbers that you would put on your cover page on your application that you're seeking reimbursement for. For the project areas you're looking to expand to, that projected number would also be a part of your scoring, a part of this category as your total number of connections that you're seeking reimbursement for. That total number will scale out on the point allocations, and for my applicants that are participating in the Broadband Grant Program earlier, that table will look familiar to you, and so that the point allocation will be broken down by that. The company will be asked for some financial information. We are not asking for financials to be submitted because of the expediency we need to operate this program, but there are some data points that we're asking for on the financial viability piece for the last 3 fiscal years. And so this particular data point, just to kind of give you a heads up on that, that is business-specific information, and if applications are requested, this information will be redacted and not available for public consumption. But it is a way for us to assess the financial viability of the companies that are seeking assistance, and 20 points are allocated to that. Project readiness, very similar to some of the aspects in the existing broadband grant program. This is up to 20 points. So the applicant will need to show some evidence in this that they're ready to go to be able to meet the rapid timelines of 90 days or more. Broadband adoption assistance, 10 points, similar to the existing program. We want to see what providers are going to be able to do to help out in the broadband adoption strategy. And this has a dual benefit. Because we're talking about telework, distance learning, or telehealth, there are some key opportunities that the providers could consider in doing for their project areas in helping out in adoption. And again, this particular category has a few bullet points underneath it to describe that, but allocating 10 points. So total points available per applicant is 75. And again, we put this scoring criteria in place because we want to be able to assess each application independently, but then at the same time too, we know that this could be a popular program, that if we end up with requests way over 20 million, we need a way to assess and score and rank and to be able to select in a methodical way where that 20 million is going to go. Here are some resource links on the webpage, showmestrong.mo.gov/broadband. Has all the 6 initiatives that are described in the Rapid Broadband Deployment Strategy, as well as links and hyperlinks and program resources for each of these. And then if you need additional information related to the broadband coverage for those that are participated in the grant program, there is an actual section under program documents. This is at the bottom level of that website, lower level, and there you will find the Excel sheet of speed by census block, as well as regional maps, as well as a link to the online GIS platform where you can essentially look at some search features. We've loaded in some data sets into that, so you should be able to see also the Connect America Fund deployment locations. You should be able to see the most recent eligible areas by the FCC Auction 904 that the FCC released that on June 25th. Those shape files have been updated, as well as the June 2019 FCC broadband coverage per census blocks are loaded onto that map as well. So that's another feature that we're adding to this mix. So Chase, my colleague here at DED, has been a phenomenal support behind the scenes, helping me be successful, as well as Katie Blake. They've been rapidly helping me today with a lot of the behind the scenes. Chase is going to kind of help me make sure that we go through all the questions that are coming through on the webinar. We want to make sure we are able to address all of them as much as we can, but we really want to be able to answer as many of these as we can. But we know that we're just past the close of business, and I'm sure many of you would like to start your holiday. But let's go through any questions through the chat feature. We will accept those now and get those answered. Question from Chad about the middle mile. No, Chad, there's not anything in existence on that related to middle mile. And Chad, you also have a question here. Subscription for internet service that will be required with the installation if grant funds are used. If I'm understanding you correctly, that would be related to, yes, providers will be required that it is a subscription, so that it needs to be a qualified household, and that they are subscribing, and that meets that definition of necessary under the CARES Act and gives us that ability to validate what we're doing. If they were to come a knocking asking how do we spend our coronavirus relief fund, we want to be able to confidently say our governor, under his leadership, absolutely wants to increase digital infrastructure, broadband, to help in all sectors of our economy, from education, telehealth, entrepreneurship, business retention and attraction, as well as, and let us not forget, our agricultural partners that desperately need high-speed internet to engage, connect, and for them to be on the global market. Question in from Mike, symmetrical. That's why you see the range in there. So for instance, if a provider is going to do 1 gigabit and 1 gigabit down, 30 megabit up, that would fall in the range of the 3450, up to 3450 for every per qualified household. So yes, that's kind of how we're falling that into a range. Okay, Keith, got a question. FCC assistance do not qualify. Yes, that would all those types of programs would fall into that. So they're already receiving some kind of support to help with that connection. So that would not be an allowable area. Okay, so question in about contiguous. Does all-encompassing mean entire census block, entire road? Can you better describe this concept with clarity? This is one of those things that the project area needs to be all-encompassing, that it has a certain boundary to it. I know that there is some desire to have the ability to do what's called donut holes. Donut holes are not going to be allowable under this configuration. I know that's difficult for some of you, especially for some census blocks that are deemed served, fall in a unique type of area, but we can't just carve boundaries around things in order to carve out a donut hole related to that. So yes, it is additional research on the part of the broadband providers of what the possible project areas are, or project areas that you potentially already have teed up either for the fall or for spring of 2021. I would just encourage everybody to look at the ability to expand project areas or a project area to really look at those ones that are all encompassing. So, all right, next question. Okay, so eligible areas will be the FCC recently released Auction 904 areas. How I would answer that question: the auction has not occurred yet. That auction for the FCC 904 will not occur until October 29th. And so if providers are researching project areas that would be in unserved and underserved areas, but also incorporate or also could be considered for the auction, that is up to the provider's determination if they're going to seek assistance through this reimbursement program or they're going to seek potential subsidies through the FCC auction. We just wanted providers to be mindful of that, and that those eligible areas for the FCC just got updated and released last week. And so we just encourage you to watch that if you're seeking an area for reimbursement, they essentially could get taken care of through the Missouri Broadband Grant Program, but it could risk the Auction 904. But again, that's up to the provider to determine if they're going to seek assistance. That also just happens to be an Auction 904. That auction has not occurred yet, and so that vetting and research and analysis and allocation of subsidies will be sometime after October 29th. Again, forgive me, I don't have the timeline for the FCC in front of me, but that is not resources received yet because the auction hasn't occurred. Mr. Falk has a question. Okay. What about USDA Reconnect applications pending for an area? Projects in these areas eligible or excluded? As of right now, they would have not received their funds yet, or not even been announced yet. They're still under consideration by the USDA, different program. So kind of falls in the same category for the FCC. We are aware of those project areas, and it's something that will be considered during the review process that if the USDA announces between now and when we award, that would essentially, trip or be the trigger that there is a USDA, because we would have a public release that those resources are going to those providers to help out in those identified project areas. And with that, it seems like we got most of the questions answered. This would be my time now to give you, if you have additional questions, please load them in now. A provider would receive reimbursement on only those qualified households with subscriptions before 10/30. Yes. I would encourage you to read the materials maybe a couple different times, maybe 3 different times. If you want to review the webinar, we're recording this, and we're going to make the link available, I think, by midday Monday the 6th. It's going to take us a little time to get some editing done on it, but we'll make it available and listen to this webinar again. But again, I'm always available for answering any questions. So, Mark, you have a question.
There's 2 census blocks that I'm going to be in the auction for the RDOF. And the rest of my area around here is already at 25.3 because it wasn't in the RDOF map. Therefore, it's not eligible to try to serve in an area where another competitor is already there with 25.3.
That's correct. Okay, folks, looks like we do not have any other questions coming in. Many of you have my email, but let me pop it up here. There's my email. Please, if you noodle on this tonight or read it tomorrow night or read it tomorrow, but we're all in this economic recovery phase of trying to get Missouri's efforts back up and running, and one of the ways we want to do that is with broadband. And so, folks, we really want to be able to really get this going as quickly as we possibly can. And so, yes, it may take us a little bit of time to get back to you, but we will absolutely get back to you. And so with that, folks, I think we're going to conclude our webinar today. I appreciate it. All the resource and program materials are loaded up. Download them, read them, mark them up, but certainly making myself available to you for additional follow-up questions or phone calls. And while we have challenges right now, we certainly can make a lot of things better for our Missourians out there and getting them connected. And with that, folks, I wish you a good night.